What are you up to right now? Maybe you're driving home after a long day, finishing up some chores, or just settling in for the night. Are you in the mood for a story? If so, get comfortable. I have one for you that you won't soon forget. There are two kinds of silence in this world. There's the silence of peace, the kind that settles over you like a warm blanket on a cold night, a quiet that calms the soul. And then there's the other kind, the silence of absence, a hollow ringing void where laughter and conversation used to be. It's a silence that doesn't just surround you, it consumes you. For Ranger Alex Walker, that second silence had become the entire soundtrack of his life. He didn't just work in California's Redwood National Park. He hid in it. He'd sought refuge among its colossal ancient sentinels, hoping their timeless grandeur could somehow diminish his own very human, very recent heartbreak. These were giants that had witnessed the birth and death of empires' trees, that had stood stoic against 1,000 years of storms. Surely he thought they could absorb the trivial sorrow of one man. But the forest is a mirror, not a sponge. And every evening, as the golden California sun bled through the canopy, casting cathedral-like shafts of light onto the forest floor, the silence only grew louder. The awe-inspiring beauty of his surroundings only made the emptiness inside him feel more profound. Tonight was no different. Alex went through the motions of his final patrol with the mechanical precision of a man running on autopilot. He checked the trail marker at the entrance to the tall tree's grove, his gloved hand brushing away a film of moss. He listened for the telltale signs of a distressed animal or a lost hiker, his ears tuned to the forest's rhythm. He was excellent at his job. He could read the language of a broken twig, understand the warning cry of a Stella's jay. He could listen to everything, it seemed, except the aching void in his own chest. His cabin, just a few miles from the park entrance, was no longer a home. It was just a place to sleep. The second coffee mug in the cupboard, the empty space on the coat rack, the silence where a soft voice once greeted him each, was a tiny monument to the life he had lost. He'd come here to escape the ghost of a failed promise, the phantom weight of an engagement ring he now kept locked in a drawer. He had traded the noise of a city and a crumbling relationship for the quiet of the wilderness. He was starting to realize he'd made a terrible trade. The silence of the forest was a far crueler companion. As he took one last look across the grove, a deep sigh escaped his lips. Time to go home. To the quiet. To the emptiness. He turned his heavy boots crunching softly on the bed of pine needles. But then a sound. It was so faint at first he thought he'd imagined it. A thin, high-pitched whine, almost like the wind whistling through a crack in a rock. He stopped tilting his head, every ranger instinct on high alert. He stood perfectly still, letting the silence settle again, waiting. Nothing. He shook his head. Just the forest playing tricks on a tired mind. He took another step, and there it was again. Closer this time. Louder. Sharper. This was no trick of the wind. This was a sound of distress. It was small, desperate, and it sliced through the evening calm like a tiny, jagged knife. His eyes scanned the deep shadows pooling at the base of the giant redwoods. For a moment there was only the slow, ancient dance of light and darkness. And then, from the thick undergrowth of ferns, a small creature emerged. It was a golden retriever puppy, no more than a few months old. Its beautiful coat was matted with mud and burrs, and it was trembling not from cold, but from what looked like pure, unadulterated terror. Alex's training kicked in. A tourist's dog, most likely, wandered off the trail. He softened his expression, crouching down slowly. "Hey there, little guy," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "You lost." But the puppy didn't react the way lost dogs usually do. It didn't cower or bound forward for affection. Instead, it stopped just out of reach, its entire body quivering, and let out another sharp, insistent yelp. Its eyes, intelligent, focused, and filled with a terrifying urgency, were locked on his. This wasn't the look of a lost pet. This was the look of a messenger with a life-or-death telegram. The puppy took a few steps back towards the dark, menacing wall of the forest, then turned its gaze, never leaving Alex's face. It was a clear, unmistakable invitation. A demand. And in that moment, Alex felt a jolt that had nothing to do with his training. He was a man who followed rules, who stuck to the marked trails both in the forest and in his own tightly controlled life. But the desperate plea in this tiny creature's eyes, it wasn't in any manual he'd ever read. And it was a plea that promised to lead him far, far away from the safe, silent path he had chosen for himself. For a trained professional like Alex, there's a protocol for everything. A lost dog near a national park is a common occurrence, a simple problem with a standard solution. You approach slowly. You speak in a calm, reassuring voice. You check for a collar, for tags, for any sign of identification. You gently leash the animal and lead it back towards the ranger station, where it will be safe until its owners are found. Alex began to run through that mental checklist, his professionalism a shield against the puppy's strangely intense gaze. "Okay, buddy, let's see what we've got here." He took a cautious step forward, his hand outstretched. The puppy, who Alex would later come to know as Scout, didn't flinch, but he didn't move closer either. He stood his ground, a tiny, mud-caked soldier on a desperate mission. When Alex was just a few feet away, Scout did something extraordinary. He let out a sharp bark, not of fear, but of command, and then nudged Alex's outstretched hand with his nose. The touch was firm, deliberate. Then he spun around, ran about 10 feet down, a dark, barely there trail leading away from the safety of the main park, and stopped. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming in the twilight, and whined. It was a sound that said, "This way. Now. We're losing time." Alex froze, his hand still hovering in the air. This was not in the manual. Lost dogs are disoriented. They are scared. They either run from you or they run to you. They don't try to lead you into the dark. "Whoa, hold on there," Alex said, trying to regain control of the situation. He pulled a spare lead from his utility belt. "Come on. Back to the path. We'll find your family." He tried to circle around the puppy to gently herd him back towards the main grove. But Scout was like a creature possessed by a singular purpose. Every time Alex moved to his left, the puppy sidestepped to block him. Every time Alex tried to get in front, Scout would dart back towards the forbidden trail, barking with more and more frustration. It was a bizarre, silent negotiation. A battle of wills between a 200-pound park ranger and a 20-pound puppy. And the puppy was winning. We've all heard the stories, haven't we? The kind of incredible tales that sound more like Hollywood screenplays than real life. Dogs that travel thousands of miles to find their owners. Cats that sense earthquakes before they happen. But there are also the quieter, more incredible accounts, documented cases, of animals, especially dogs, as intelligent and empathetic as golden retrievers, actively seeking human help in a crisis. They don't just know something is wrong, they formulate a plan. They identify a potential ally. They communicate with a clarity that transcends language. Alex had always filed those stories away, as heartwarming anomalies, exceptions to the rule. But standing here in the deepening gloom of the ancient forest, locked in a standoff with this determined little creature, he felt the cold, hard logic of his training begin to crack. His brain was telling him this was a lost, confused animal. But his gut, that part of him he had silenced for so long, was screaming that he was the one who was lost. He was the one who was confused. This tiny dog was acting with more certainty and purpose than Alex had felt in over a year. And that was the thought that broke him. He looked from the puppy's pleading eyes to the dark, unwelcoming mouth of the trail. Every instinct for self-preservation, every rule in his handbook told him to turn back. An unmarked trail at dusk was a ranger's nightmare. It was a recipe for getting lost, for getting hurt. But then he looked back at the puppy. The little creature was trembling again, not with terror, but with the sheer effort of holding it all together. He saw for the first time the raw, undiluted desperation fueling its mission. In that moment, a choice was made. It wasn't a rational decision. It was an act of surrender, a leap of faith. Alex clipped the unused lead back onto his belt and took a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs. "Okay," he whispered, as much to himself as to the dog. "Okay, you win." He took one step onto the forbidden trail. The puppy let out a single relieved yip and immediately plunged forward into the shadows, trusting that the human had finally understood. An unspoken contract had just been signed in the fading light. A promise to help sealed without a single word. And as Alex followed the small fleeting shadow into the unknown, he couldn't shake a single terrifying thought. Sometimes the first step toward finding yourself requires you to get completely and utterly lost. Have you ever made a decision that you can't explain? A choice that defies all logic, driven by a force you don't understand? As Alex crossed the invisible line between the marked trail and the wild, untamed forest, he felt a profound sense of unease. The air immediately grew colder, heavier. The comforting sounds of the park, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of a squirrel vanished, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. This was a part of the park, known to rangers as the Tangle. It was a place where the ancient redwoods grew so close together they choked the sky, a labyrinth of thorny undergrowth and hidden ravines, where the sun never reached the ground. Tourists were forbidden here for a reason. It was a place you could walk into and never walk out of. Scout the puppy moved with an eerie confidence, a tiny beacon of gold, navigating the treacherous terrain. He scrambled over fallen logs and darted through thickets of thorns, always looking back to ensure his human was still following. Alex, his hand now resting instinctively on the flashlight clipped to his belt, followed close behind. The peaceful park ranger was gone. The trained survivalist had taken over. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the unseen bushes sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. They walked for what felt like an eternity, deeper and deeper into the encroaching darkness. And then it happened. Alex's foot, placed carefully on what he thought was solid ground, snagged on something hard, metallic, and unforgiving. He stumbled, catching himself on a tree trunk just before he fell. He cursed under his breath, annoyed, but when he shone his flashlight down at his feet, the annoyance instantly turned to ice-cold dread. It wasn't a root. It wasn't a rock. It was a trap. A rusted but recently sprung leg-hold trap. His blood ran cold. These things were brutally efficient and brutally illegal. He knelt, his trained eyes scanning the mechanism. The earth around it was disturbed. This wasn't some forgotten relic from decades past. This was active. And in that one horrifying moment, the entire story changed. This was no longer a simple case of a lost dog and its mother having an accident. This was a crime scene. A wave of nausea washed over him as he realized the horrifying truth. Willow, the mother dog, wasn't just lost. She wasn't just injured. She had been hunted. They were walking into the hunting ground of an illegal poacher, a person who operates in the shadows, who has no regard for the law, and who would likely not be happy about a park ranger discovering their handiwork. Suddenly the forest wasn't just dangerous, it was hostile. Every shadow could be hiding a threat. Alex's mission had just shifted from rescue to something far more perilous. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum against the silent woods. Scout, sensing the change in Alex, let out a sharp, frantic bark as if to say, "Forget that. She's this way. Hurry." Alex pushed the fear down his focus, narrowing to a razor's edge. He followed the puppy, his flashlight beam now cutting frantically through the darkness, his eyes scanning not just the path, but the trees, the bushes, looking for any other sign of human interference. Scout led him to the edge of a small clearing, and then stopped, whining a heart-wrenching sound of pure misery. Alex swept his light across the space, and the beam landed on a sight that would be seared into his memory forever. There she was. Willow, a magnificent golden retriever. Her coat the color of spun honey, now matted with dirt and something dark and wet. Her back leg was caught in the cruel serrated jaws of another trap identical to the one he had just found. The chain attached to it was wrapped around a massive fallen log, anchoring her to the spot. She was lying on her side, her beautiful face pressed into the cold, damp earth. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. She was so still, so broken, that for a terrifying second, Alex thought they were too late. But then, as Scout whimpered and nudged her face, her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes, hazy with pain and exhaustion, found Alex's. There was no fear in them, only a profound, soul-deep weariness. It was the look of a creature that had fought and fought hard, but knew it was losing the battle. And in that silent gaze, Alex saw the terrible truth of the situation. This wasn't just about freeing her. This was a race against the clock, a fight for her very life. And the clock was just seconds from striking midnight. There are moments in life that strip you down to your very core. Moments where there are no rules, no protocol, no time to think, only a raw, primal need to act. Kneeling in the dirt, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the heartbreaking scene before him, Alex felt the carefully constructed walls of his professional and personal life crumble into dust. His training screamed at him, "Call it in. Secure the scene. Do not interfere. Wait for the wildlife veterinary team." It was the safe play, the right play, the one that wouldn't get him fired. His radio crackled to life in his mind. He could almost hear the calm, detached voice of the dispatcher. But one look at Willow's shallow breathing, at the glazed look in her eyes, told him the brutal truth: protocol was a death sentence. The vet team was a 2-hour drive away. She didn't have 2 hours. She barely had 2 minutes. In that instant, a fierce protective fire ignited in his gut, burning away all the doubt, all the apathy, all the grief that had held him captive for so long. He was not going to let this life fade away in the darkness, not on his watch. "Okay, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to get you out of this. I promise." He moved with a desperate urgency, his hands examining the cruel steel trap. It was a simple, brutal mechanism designed to snap shut with incredible force and not let go. To open it, he would have to use his bare hands to pry the jaws apart against the immense tension of its springs. He braced himself, positioning his feet, and took a firm grip on the cold steel. He pulled. Nothing. The metal didn't budge. He pulled again, every muscle in his back and arms screaming in protest. A low groan escaped his lips as he poured every ounce of his strength, his fear and his rage into the effort. The jaws of the trap began to move millimeter by agonizing millimeter. As the pressure on her leg lessened, Willow let out a silent, heart-stopping scream. Her body convulsed, but no sound came out. It was a sight more painful than any cry. At the same time, Scout the puppy began whining frantically, licking his mother's face as if trying to absorb her pain. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Alex grunted through clenched teeth. With one final guttural roar, the trap groaned open just enough. He kicked her mangled leg free with his boot. The jaws snapped shut with a sickening clang that echoed through the silent clearing. She was free. But the fight was far from over. He knew carrying her out was borderline impossible. She was a large dog, at least 70 pounds of dead weight. But there was no other choice. He gently, carefully gathered her into his arms. The moment he lifted her, the true weight of his decision crashed down on him. She was heavy, awkward, and her body was limp. This wasn't just the weight of a dog, it was the weight of hope, and it was crushing. The journey back through the tangle was a living nightmare. Every step was a battle. Thorns tore at his clothes and skin. Branches whipped at his face. He stumbled over unseen roots, his legs burning his lungs on fire, but he never loosened his grip. Willow was a warm, fragile presence in his arms, her shallow breaths ghosting against his neck. Beside him, Scout was a constant loyal shadow, darting ahead to find the clearest path, then running back his small nudges and encouraging yips, the only thing keeping Alex moving forward. This was the penance he never knew he needed. Every ounce of pain, every drop of sweat was an act of redemption. He was carrying this broken creature through his own darkness, and with every agonizing step, he felt a part of his own shattered soul begin to knit itself back together. After an eternity of struggle, they burst out of the tree line and back onto the main trail. The sight of his patrol truck parked and waiting was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He laid Willow gently on the back seat, Scout immediately jumping in to curl up beside her head. The race wasn't over. He slammed the truck into gear tires, spitting gravel as he sped down the park road. The drive to the vet clinic in Arcata was a blur of tunnel vision and frantic prayer. It was a silent, intense hour. The only sounds the rumble of the engine, Alex's own ragged breathing, and the faint, impossibly fragile whisper of Willow's. He pulled into the emergency animal clinic, lights flashing, and carried her inside, shouting for help. A team rushed out, whisking Willow away on a gurney. Alex was left standing alone in the sterile, brightly lit lobby, his arms aching and empty. The doors to the treatment area swung shut behind her, leaving him with only the deafening silence and the haunting image of her last weary look. He had gotten her here. He had won the race against the forest and the clock. But now a new, more terrifying battle was about to begin, and it was one he was completely powerless to fight. The world is a strange place. You can spend an hour fighting for your life in a dark forest, your body screaming, your mind on fire with adrenaline, and then in the blink of an eye you're sitting under the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, in a silence so profound it feels like you've gone deaf. The doors to the veterinary trauma center swung shut, and just like that, Alex's part in the drama was over. He was no longer a rescuer or a hero. He was just a man in a waiting room covered in mud and scratches with nothing to do but wait. And the waiting was 1,000 times harder than the fight. He sank into a cold plastic chair. Scout the puppy refused to leave his side, curling into a tight, trembling ball at his feet. His small body a constant warm reminder of what was at stake. Minutes stretched into an hour. The rhythmic ticking of a clock on the wall was the only sound, each tick a tiny hammer blow against Alex's frayed nerves. Finally the doors opened again. A woman in blue scrubs with kind, weary eyes walked towards him. This was Dr. Anya Sharma. She pulled up a chair, her expression a careful mixture of professional gravity and human compassion. Ranger Walker. She began, her voice soft but direct. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. She's in critical condition. Severe dehydration, significant blood loss. The leg is badly shattered. The trap did a lot of damage. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Frankly, it's a miracle she was still alive when you found her. Her will to live, to get back to this little guy, she nodded towards Scout, is the only reason we have a fighting chance. Dr. Sharma went on to explain the procedures they were performing: IV fluids, antibiotics. the complex surgery required to try and save the leg. But Alex was barely hearing the words. He was trapped in the memory of Willow's eyes, the silent plea, the profound weariness. And then the dam broke. Sitting there under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the clinic, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving him exposed and raw. The fear of losing Willow, this dog he'd known for only a few hours, unearthed a grief he had buried for over a year. He saw not just Willow's pain, but the ghost of his own. He remembered the last strained conversation with his fiancée, the finality in her voice, the click of the door, as she walked out of his life forever. He had built a fortress around that pain brick by brick, until he was completely numb. He thought he had healed, but he had only hidden. Now the selfless love of a mother dog for her puppy and the unconditional trust of that puppy in him had taken a sledgehammer to his walls. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. Soon his shoulders were shaking with silent, racking sobs. He wasn't just crying for a dog. He was crying for the man he used to be, for the love he had lost, for the crushing loneliness he had mistaken for strength. Scout, sensing the shift, crept into his lap and began licking the tears from his face, a small, warm anchor in a storm of grief. You see, the greatest battles aren't fought in the dark woods with your muscles and your will. They're fought in the quiet waiting rooms of your soul. It's in these moments of forced stillness, when you can no longer run from yourself, that you finally see the truth. Alex realized he hadn't just been saving a dog. He had been fighting for a reason to feel again. After what felt like a lifetime, Dr. Sharma returned. Her face was tired, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. "She's stable," she said, and Alex felt a surge of relief so powerful it almost buckled him. The surgery was complicated, but she's a fighter. He stood up, ready to hear the good news, ready for the happy ending. But the doctor held up a hand. "Alex," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "We saved her life, but I need you to be prepared. The damage to the nerves and bone is extensive. She will survive, but she may never walk on that leg again. Her recovery will be long, painful, and expensive. There's no guarantee she'll ever be the dog she was." It was a gut punch, a cruel twist of fate. They had won the battle against death, but now an entirely new war was beginning, a war of recovery, of patience, of pain. Dr. Sharma looked at him, her eyes searching his. "She's going to need someone who is completely committed. It's a lot to ask." And there it was. Not a question, but a choice. A promise waiting to be made. He could walk away, hand her over to a shelter, and go back to his quiet, empty life. Or he could step into the fire with her. He looked down at the trusting puppy asleep in his lap, and he thought of the brave mother fighting for her life just a few feet away. His own long night of the soul was over. Theirs was just beginning. There's a common mistake we make when we hear stories of rescue. We imagine a hero swooping in a victim being saved and a clean, happy ending. We imagine the act of saving is a one-way street. But Alex, standing in that quiet clinic, with the weight of the vet's words hanging in the air, was beginning to understand a much deeper truth. A promise isn't something you give to someone who is weak. It's something you forge with someone who is strong. He looked at Dr. Sharma, and there wasn't a trace of doubt in his eyes. "A lot to ask," he repeated softly. "After what she's been through, after what she did for her son, it's the least I can do." He looked down at Scout, who was now awake and watching him intently. "We're in this together, whatever it takes." And so began the long road back. It was a journey measured not in miles, but in tiny, monumental victories. Alex's life found a new rhythm, a new purpose. Every day after his patrol, he wouldn't go home to his empty cabin. He would go to the clinic, He became a fixture in their recovery room, his quiet, steady presence a source of comfort for two very scared, very brave dogs. He was there for the first real victory, the day Willow, who had refused all food, finally tentatively ate a piece of boiled chicken from the palm of his hand. It was a fragile truce, a sign of budding trust. He was there a week later for the first weak thump, thump, thump of her tail against the bedding when he walked into the room. It was a flicker of her old spirit, a spark in the darkness. He worked with the physical therapists, learning how to gently massage her atrophied muscles. He celebrated the day she finally stood on her 3 good legs, trembling with effort, but refusing to fall. And all the while, Scout was her tiny, furry cheerleader, bringing his mother his favorite squeaky toy, nudging her nose and sleeping curled up as close as he could get, without hurting her. But as Willow healed, a piece of Alex's past refused to rest. The image of that cruel, illegal trap was burned into his mind. This wasn't just an accident. It was an act of malice, and it couldn't go unanswered. During his days off, he wasn't resting. He was investigating. He took his colleague, a seasoned ranger named Dave, back to the tangle. They meticulously combed the area, flagging every piece of evidence, the snapped wires, the discarded bait, the faint boot prints near the scene. Alex used his intimate knowledge of the park, cross-referencing it with past reports of suspicious activity. It was a slow, frustrating puzzle, but Alex worked it with the same relentless dedication he showed to Willow. And then they got a break. A tip from a local hiker about a truck seen in a restricted area. It was the final piece. They found the poacher, a man who saw the magnificent creatures of the forest not as living beings, but as commodities. Standing there as the man was apprehended, seeing the collection of illegal traps in the back of his truck, Alex didn't feel rage. He felt a quiet, profound sense of justice. He had not only saved the victim, he had helped stop the villain. He had honored his duty as a guardian of the wild. Weeks turned into 2 months. The day finally came when Dr. Sharma met him at the door with a smile. "They're ready," she said, "as ready as they'll ever be." The adoption paperwork was, as the original story once said, surprisingly simple. A few signatures on a form that felt ridiculously inadequate to capture the depth of the journey they had all been on. It was then that Alex finally understood the lesson that had been unfolding all along. He had walked into that forest thinking he was the hero of the story, the strong one saving the weak. He was wrong. He had been a man adrift in a sea of silent grief, and these dogs had thrown him a lifeline. They gave him a reason to fight, a reason to care, a reason to come home. They filled the deafening silence of his life with purpose. In saving them, he had, in every sense of the word, been saved himself. He settled the bill, his savings account now significantly lighter, but his heart fuller than it had been in years. He walked back to the recovery room one last time as a visitor. Willow stood to greet him, her walk now a permanent, graceful limp, a testament to her resilience. Scout bounded around his feet, a blur of joyful energy. "Ready to go home?" Alex asked, his voice catching. He clipped a new leash onto Willow's collar. She leaned against his leg, a gesture of complete and total trust. He scooped up Scout in his other arm. As he walked out of the clinic and into the bright California sun, he walked past a sign on the wall. It read, "Who rescued whom?" He smiled. He knew the answer. He led them to his truck, opened the passenger door, and watched as his 2 companions, his 2 saviors, his new family, prepared for the journey home. Of course. Here is the final part of the story, followed by a call to action for your YouTube channel. The drive home was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet from the one Alex had grown used to. It wasn't the silence of absence, the hollow echo of a life that was. This was the silence of anticipation, a peaceful shared quiet filled with the soft panting of Scout in the passenger seat, and the steady rhythmic breathing of Willow resting her head peacefully on the center console, her trusting eyes occasionally glancing up at Alex. The journey was no longer a frantic race, but a calm, steady procession toward a new beginning. When Alex unlocked the door to his cabin, he braced himself for the familiar wave of emptiness that always greeted him. But it never came. Instead, he was met with the click-clack of paws on the wooden floor. Scout, with the boundless curiosity of youth, immediately began a whirlwind tour, his nose investigating every corner. Willow, more reserved, stepped inside with a gentle dignity. She walked with her permanent, graceful limp, a visible scar that told a story not of weakness but of incredible survival. She made a slow circle of the main room, her tail giving a soft, steady thump against the furniture, before she settled onto the rug in front of the cold fireplace, letting out a deep, contented sigh. It was the sound of a warrior finally home from the war. That night, for the first time in over a year, Alex didn't feel like a ghost in his own house. The silence was gone, replaced by the gentle jingle of a collar, the soft snores of a puppy, and the comforting presence of two souls who had anchored him back to the world. He came to understand that healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls you. Willow's scars were a part of her story, a testament to her strength. And Alex's own emotional scars, the ones he had tried so hard to hide, were a part of his. These dogs didn't erase his pain. They gave him a reason to heal around it, to grow stronger in the broken places. Months passed. The seasons in the great redwood forest began to turn. The story of the ranger and the two golden retrievers he saved, or who saved him, became a quiet legend among the locals. They were no longer just Alex, Willow, and Scout. They were a unit, a family, the guardians of Redwood Creek. On his patrols, Alex was a changed man. The weary, detached ranger was gone. In his place was a man who walked with a purpose, who saw the beauty of the forest not as a mirror for his loneliness, but as a home to be protected. Willow was his steadfast shadow, her calm, watchful presence a comfort to all who saw her. Scout, now a lanky, energetic teenager, was the park's unofficial ambassador of joy, greeting hikers with an irrepressible happiness. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight set the sky ablaze in hues of orange and purple, Alex sat on his porch. Scout was chasing a moth in the yard while Willow rested her head on Alex's knee, her gaze fixed on him with unwavering devotion. He looked out at the ancient silent trees that had once been his refuge from the world, and he finally understood the story's true lesson. Our greatest purpose is rarely found when we are looking for ourselves. It is found when we forget ourselves in the service of another. It is found in the quiet decision to answer a desperate cry for help, to open your heart when it's been locked for far too long. He hadn't just saved two dogs from the darkness of the woods. They had saved his soul from the darkness of the quiet and brought him back into the light. Thank you so much for joining us on that journey. If this story touched your heart, it would mean the world to us if you'd consider becoming a part of this community. Every story we share is about connection, courage, and the incredible bonds that make us human, and sometimes the bonds we share with animals. What was the most powerful moment in Alex's story for you? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, and we love hearing how these stories resonate with you. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please give this video a like. It's a small click for you, but it helps YouTube share this story with so many others who might need a little bit of hope today. And finally, if you don't want to miss the next story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're so grateful to have you here. Until next time, take care and remember to look for the light in the quiet moments.